Hey, my name is Daniel. I'm 32 years old, and I live in a rented house on the eastern edge of Coopersville, Michigan, a small town about 20 minutes west of Grand Rapids, where the winters come early and stay longer than they're welcome, and everybody waves at everybody from their cars, whether they know them or not. I work as a plumber, residential service and repair, mostly the unglamorous end of it. Not the new construction side where you're roughing in fresh pipe in a clean house, but the call you at 7 in the morning because something's leaking side. Water heaters, corroded supply lines, drain blockages, pressure problems, fixtures that have been dripping for so long the homeowner stopped hearing it. I drive a white service truck with a steel box in the bed full of tools and fittings and pipe stock. I've been doing it for 10 years. Before that, I did 2 years of an engineering degree at Grand Valley that I ran out of money for. And before that, I grew up in this same town helping my uncle pull pipe on weekends, because it was the kind of family where that was the natural Saturday activity. My days have a rhythm I could describe in my sleep. I'm up at 5:45. I check the dispatch board on my phone for the day's calls. I make coffee in the old percolator that belonged to my grandmother, which I keep because it makes better coffee than anything I could replace it with, and because some things you hold on to for reasons that aren't entirely practical. I load whatever specialty fittings I know I'll need for the day, which is an exercise in guesswork, because residential plumbing is mostly surprises. You open a wall and find pipe that was installed by someone who had a theory about plumbing that turned out to be incorrect. I drive. I work. I explain things to people in their own homes, which requires a specific kind of patience, because nobody wants to hear what's wrong with their house, and everybody wants to understand it at the same time. I come home. I wash the truck's windshield in the driveway because it bothers me to park a dirty truck. I eat something. I read. I sleep. The phone doesn't light up much after 8. I have a few friends from high school who still live in the area, and we get together occasionally, and that's good. I have my Uncle Roy, who retired last year and calls me on Thursdays to ask how the week went. I have my neighbor Gerald, who is 74, and brings me tomatoes from his garden every August and asks me, every single August, whether I've found a good woman yet. I tell him I'm working on it. He nods with the patience of a man who has heard that answer before and isn't buying it. Gerald is not wrong. I'm not working on it. I go to work and I come home and I read and I sleep, and the quiet of the house is something I've made my peace with in the way you make peace with a draft you can't find the source of. You stop looking and you put on another layer. There was a woman named Renata I was with for 3 years. We ended things on a Wednesday evening in February because I had stopped being surprised by anything, and she had noticed before I had. And she was honest about it, which I respected then and respect more now. She moved to Detroit. I still think about her sometimes, not with longing, exactly, more with the particular gratitude you feel toward someone who told you a true thing about yourself, even when it cost them something. I tell you all of this so that what happened in the 3rd week of October makes a certain kind of sense. Because the kind of morning it was, the kind where nothing is supposed to change, where the day has the specific texture of a day like every other day, is exactly the kind of morning that tends to mean something, if you're paying attention. The call came in at 8:15. A burst supply line at a house on Orchard Street. The homeowner was a woman named Margaret Calloway, 67, voice tight, with the controlled alarm of someone who has been watching water spread across their kitchen floor and has been holding themselves together through sheer will for the 20 minutes it took to reach me. I was there in 11 minutes. The front door opened before I reached the porch steps. Margaret Calloway was a trim woman with white hair cut close, and the kind of posture that comes from decades of deciding not to let things defeat her. She had a dish towel in each hand both soaked. "It's the line under the sink," she said. I turned the shutoff, but it's still weeping. "The shutoff's probably corroded," I said. "It happens. I'll take care of it." She let me in. The kitchen was small and very clean, and the linoleum was wet in a 6-foot radius around the sink cabinet. She had laid every towel she owned on the floor, which was the right instinct. I got under the cabinet and looked at what I was dealing with. The compression fitting on the cold supply had cracked, probably a freeze from the previous winter that had been working on it all year before it finally let go. The shutoff valve was corroded to the point of being ornamental rather than functional, which is more common than it should be in houses of a certain age. I told her what it was and what it would take. She stood with her arms crossed and listened carefully, the way people listen when they want to understand rather than when they're waiting to ask about the cost. She asked 2 good questions. I answered them. She said, "All right, do what needs doing." I was an hour and 20 minutes into the repair, new shutoff valve, new supply line, fitting the compression properly, when the front door opened and I heard footsteps in the front hall. "Mom?" A woman's voice. "I came as soon as I could get away. Are you all right?" "I'm fine, sweetheart," Margaret's voice, from the living room where she'd been waiting. "The plumber's here. He's nearly done." Footsteps into the kitchen. I heard them stop. I was still under the cabinet. I slid out to check the fitting and looked up from the floor. She was standing in the kitchen doorway in a winter coat that hadn't fully been unbuttoned yet, a canvas bag on one shoulder, dark hair in a loose braid that had come partially undone, some strands across her face from the wind outside. She was looking at the floor, at the towels, at the state of the kitchen, doing the rapid inventory that a person does when they've rushed somewhere to help and are assessing how bad it is. Her coat had a tear in the left pocket seam that had been repaired with iron-on tape, a careful fix, but visible up close. Her boots were wet at the toe from whatever puddle she'd walked through getting here. Her eyes, when they reached me, were dark and serious, and slightly too large for her face, in the way that makes a person look like they're always paying more attention than you expect. "How bad is it?" she said. She was asking me, not the room. "Contained," I said. "Supply line and shutoff valve. No structural damage. The floor's wet, but it'll dry." She exhaled. Just slightly, the kind of exhale that releases something you've been holding. "Okay," she said. "Good." She looked at the cabinet and the tools and the parts I had laid out on a folded tarp. "How long?" 20 minutes, I said. "Maybe less." She nodded. She put her bag down on the kitchen table, the only dry surface remaining, and took off her coat. Underneath she had on a heavy wool sweater and the look of someone who had come from somewhere she hadn't planned to leave that morning. She rolled up her sleeves, moved to the towel nearest the sink cabinet, and picked it up. "There's a bucket in the hall closet if you need somewhere to wring these," I said. "I know where it is," she said. "It's my mother's house." "Right," I said. "Sorry, don't be," she said. She went and got the bucket. She wrung the towel over it with efficient, practiced wringing, the kind you learn from years of helping with things rather than standing near them. She came back and picked up the next one. We worked in the same space for the next 20 minutes without getting in each other's way. That's rarer than it sounds. Most people, when a tradesman is working in their kitchen, either hover too close or remove themselves entirely, and neither of those things is comfortable. She just worked alongside, wringing towels, moving the bucket, setting the dry ones flat on the counter to be useful again. At one point I needed the cabinet door swung wider, and without my asking, she moved it. At one point she needed to reach past me for something and said "excuse me" in a tone that meant exactly that, and nothing performative. Her name was Wren. I learned that when Margaret came back into the kitchen and said, "Wren, There's tea if you want it. Wren. I'd never heard it as a name before. It suited her in the way that names sometimes do when you hear them applied to the right person. Exact. A little unexpected, not trying to be more than it is. I finished the repair. I ran the water. I checked the fitting from 3 angles, dried the cabinet interior, checked again. No weep. Clean connection. Valve opening and closing the way it should. I showed Margaret how to operate it, which she observed with the focused attention of someone who intends to remember. You're going to want to have the other shut-off valves in the house checked before winter, I told her. They're all the same age. The one under the bathroom sink is probably in similar condition. Can you do that today? She said. I can, I said. I had 2 other calls on the board, but nothing that couldn't be shifted an hour. I went through the house. Bathroom sink, valve in better shape, but I replaced it as a preventive measure. The part cost almost nothing. Toilet supply, fine. Laundry room valves, one concerning enough that I changed it out. I found a slow drip at the base of the laundry room faucet that hadn't been reported because it had been there long enough to seem normal. I fixed that too. Wren followed me through the house, not hovering, just present. She watched what I did with the same focused, practical attention she'd brought to the towels. Once, when I was under the bathroom sink, she said, "Is that one worse than the kitchen?" I told her it wasn't, but that it was worth doing. She said, "Good call." In the laundry room, while I was tightening the faucet packing nut, she said, "What's the drip caused by?" "Packing's worn," I said. "It's the seal around the stem. When it gets old, it stops holding pressure tight. So the seal just gives out," she said. "Eventually," I said, "usually because nobody notices until it's been leaking long enough that fixing it becomes urgent." She was quiet for a moment. "That feels like a metaphor for something," she said. "Most plumbing problems do," I said. She made a small sound that was almost a laugh. Not all the way a laugh, more like the beginning of one that she decided not to finish. But it was real. When I was packing up in the kitchen, Margaret sat at the table and asked me how much she owed. I told her. She wrote the check with the careful penmanship of someone who grew up when penmanship meant something. She handed it to me and said, "You're thorough. I appreciate that." She said it the way people say things they mean, without decoration. "Thank you," I said. I picked up my bag. "The fittings should hold well through winter. If anything gives you trouble, call. I will," she said. Then she looked at me with the directness of someone who has been sizing up situations for 67 years and has stopped being indirect about conclusions. "Are you from Coopersville?" "Born and raised," I said. She nodded. Something decided in her expression. "My daughter grew up here and moved back last year," she said. "She teaches at the elementary school on Maple." She said it simply, as information. Then she looked toward the hallway where Wren had gone to retrieve her coat. "She doesn't get out much. Works too hard." I didn't know what to do with that. I looked at my tool bag. That's the kind of thing mothers say. Wren's voice came from the hallway. She appeared in the kitchen doorway with her coat half on and an expression that was somewhere between embarrassed and resigned. "Mom, I'm just making conversation," Margaret said, without any guilt whatsoever. "You're really not," Wren said. Margaret looked at me with the faint private satisfaction of a woman who has gotten away with something and knows it. I looked at Wren. Wren looked at me, and then looked at the ceiling, and then looked back at me with an expression I can only describe as the specific mortification of a person whose mother has just done exactly what they knew their mother was going to do. "I'm sorry," she said to me. "She does this. It's fine, I said. It is absolutely not fine. She looked at her mother. He's here to fix the pipes, Mom. He's not here for... She stopped. She pressed her fingers briefly to her forehead. It's not appropriate. He seems like a decent man, Margaret said, serene as a woman in a painting. You've known him for 2 hours, Wren said. I know, Margaret said. My point stands. I picked up my bag. I looked at Wren. Her face was flushed slightly at the cheekbones. She was mortified in the genuine way, not the performed way, and underneath the mortification there was something that looked like it might, given room, become something else. I'll let myself out, I said. I'll walk you, Wren said immediately. The way you say something when the alternative is worse. She walked me to the truck. The October air was cold and direct. The sky the flat white of a Michigan fall that hasn't decided yet whether it's going to snow. She had her coat buttoned now, and her hands in her pockets, and she walked beside me with the short, purposeful steps of someone burning off something. I'm sorry about that, she said again. You really don't have to keep apologizing, I said. She's been doing it since my last relationship ended, Wren said. Identifying men. Like a spotter. How long ago was that? I said. I'm not sure why I asked. It came out before I decided to ask it. She glanced at me sideways. 1.5 years, she said. Why? Just calibrating, I said. She looked at me for a moment. Something shifted in her expression, the mortification backing off a little, something more uncertain taking its place. She's not wrong, she said. Then, quickly, that she thinks you seem decent. I'm not. I'm not saying anything beyond that. I know. I said. We reached the truck. I put my bag in the steel box and closed it. She was standing on the curb with her hands still in her pockets, and she was looking at the truck the way you look at something when you're not really looking at it, when what you're doing is deciding something. She's going to ask me about you, Wren said. Tonight, she's going to ask what I thought. What are you going to tell her? I said. She looked at me. The directness of it was sudden. I don't know yet, she said. I just got here. I looked at her for a moment. Then I took out one of my cards, the plain ones, just the name and number, and held it out. She looked at it. She looked at me. She took it carefully, the way you take something you're not fully committed to but not willing to give back. The laundry room drip might come back, I said, if the packing's further gone than I thought. Call if it does. She looked at the card. Okay, she said. Or for any other reason, I said. I don't know where that came from. I'm not a man who says things like that. My face stayed level, and I was grateful for that. She looked up at me again. The uncertain thing behind her eyes did not resolve into certainty, but it did not disappear either. I'll keep that in mind, she said. I got in the truck. I drove to my next call. I spent the rest of the afternoon doing the work with the particular focused quality of someone who is using the work to keep from thinking about something else. It didn't entirely work. That evening, Gerald brought me a late-season squash from his garden, the kind he grows for keeping rather than eating right away. He handed it over the fence and said, "Good day?" And I said, "Interesting day," and he nodded like that was a sufficient answer, which from Gerald it was. She texted 4 days later. The text said, "The laundry room drip is back. Also, my mother has asked about you twice. Wren Calloway." I looked at that last part for a moment. The way she'd signed her full name, like a letter, like she was filing something official. I texted back, "I can come by Saturday morning if that works. Tell your mother the faucet packing is probably the secondary issue." A pause. Then, What's the primary issue? I looked at my phone in the kitchen of the house on Cartwright, my house, with its fixed windows and its percolator and its particular quiet. I typed. The seal wasn't as far gone as I thought. I was being optimistic. It happens. Another pause, longer. Then, Saturday morning works. 8:30? 8:30, I sent back. She sent back nothing else, but she didn't need to. Saturday morning, Margaret Calloway opened the door and looked at me, and looked past me at the truck and said, with the tone of someone answering a question nobody asked, "Wren's in the kitchen." Then she took herself to the living room with a cup of tea and a book, which was the most graceful exit I'd seen from a woman who had spent a week engineering this exact situation. Wren was at the kitchen table with her hands around a mug. She had on a flannel shirt, and her hair was down, and she looked different from the day of the burst pipe. Less hurried, less braced against something. She looked like someone on a Saturday morning in the kitchen she grew up in. She looked like herself. "Coffee?" she said. "Please," I said. She got up and poured it. She set it in front of the chair across from hers. I put my bag by the hall door and sat down. The drip in the laundry room could wait. We both knew that. She taught second grade at the elementary school on Maple Street. She'd grown up in Coopersville, gone to Michigan State for education, spent 5 years teaching in Grand Rapids, and come back the previous October when her mother had had a health scare, a cardiac event, minor but frightening, the kind that rearranges your understanding of what matters. She'd meant to stay 6 months. The 6 months had resolved into something more permanent without a specific decision being made, which she described with the tone of someone who was still determining how she felt about it. "Do you miss Grand Rapids?" I said. "I miss the anonymity," she said. "Here everyone knows my business before I've decided what my business is." "That doesn't change," I said. "I was born here. They still do it. Does it bother you?" she said. "Sometimes," I said. "Less than it used to. You stop needing them to have the right opinion." She looked at her mug. "I'm not there yet," she said. "I'm still bothered when people think they know the shape of my life from the outside." "What's the shape of your life from the outside?" I said. She looked up. Woman who came back. Probably stuck. Probably lonely. Probably a story about something that didn't work out. She said it without self-pity, the way you say a thing you've heard often enough to be bored by. The actual shape is different, but it's harder to see from the outside. "What's the actual shape?" I said. She considered the question like it deserved considering. "Someone who made a choice," she said. "On purpose. And is still figuring out what it means." A pause. "Someone who teaches 7-year-olds how to read and finds it genuinely meaningful, which is something most people think is sweet, and stopped there." She tilted her head. "What's the shape of your life from the outside?" "Man in a truck," I said. "Shows up, fixes things, leaves, probably doesn't think about much." "And the actual shape?" I looked at my coffee. "Someone who thinks about most things more than is strictly useful," I said. "Who reads too much for the reputation. Who finds the work genuinely satisfying, which people find surprising for some reason. Like fixing things that are broken isn't supposed to be meaningful." She looked at me for a moment. "It is, though," she said. "Meaningful, I know," I said. "I'm past needing other people to agree." She smiled at that. "Not the polite kind, the kind that reaches. The kind that means you said the thing that was true and the other person recognized it." We drank our coffee. In the living room, a page turned. The house was warm and the windows were beginning to fog at the edges from the cold outside. Eventually, I went and fixed the laundry room drip properly, a new packing washer, The kind of repair that takes 8 minutes once you have the right part, and takes however long you're willing to take if you're not in a hurry. I wasn't in a hurry. We started having coffee on Saturday mornings. That was how it began, and how it named itself, not as a date, not as a plan with stated intentions, just as the thing that happened on Saturdays. I'd come by at 8:30. Margaret would let me in and disappear, with the satisfied efficiency of a woman whose scheme was proceeding as intended. Wren would have the coffee made. We'd sit at the kitchen table for an hour, or sometimes 2, and talk about our weeks, her classroom, my calls, the particular texture of life in a small town in November, when the cold has come for good, and everything slows down to its winter speed. She was funny in the specific way that people who work with children are funny, dry and quick, and never cruel. She told me about a boy in her class named Marcus, which made me stop, and she said, "Different Marcus. He's 7 and he's convinced that the number 4 is untrustworthy." I said, "Why 4?" And she said, "He won't say." I've decided to respect it. I thought about that for the rest of the week. She asked questions the way people ask questions when they want the answer, rather than the performance of the answer. What's the worst job you've ever done? What did you almost do instead of this? What do you know now that you wish you'd known at 20? I told her the truth on all 3. She told me the truth back. That became the thing between us. Not romance exactly. Not yet. But the particular intimacy of 2 people who have agreed without saying so to be honest with each other, and have found it surprisingly manageable. One Saturday in early December, she showed me the reading corner she'd built in her classroom. She had photos on her phone. Bookshelves she'd built herself from boards and brackets, a reading rug she'd found at an estate sale, a small lamp in the corner that made the light warm. The district wouldn't fund it, she said, so I did it myself. The shelves were level, the corners flush, the books arranged by color spine and then by level, which was both practical and beautiful. "You built those?" I said. "My grandfather taught me," she said. "He thought everyone should know how to make a shelf." I looked at the photo. The brackets were well spaced, the load distribution correct. "It's a good shelf," I said. "I know," she said, without false modesty. One Saturday she came to the door before I knocked because she'd been watching for the truck. She didn't say so, but the door opened before my hand reached it, and she was already holding a mug out, and I thought about that for the rest of the day. Margaret had stopped disappearing quite so quickly. She'd started having her own cup of tea at the kitchen table when I arrived and staying for the first 10 minutes, which I didn't mind. She asked about my grandmother's percolator when I mentioned it. Her grandmother had had the same model, and we talked about that for a while. And at some point I realized I was having a conversation with a 67-year-old woman about percolators and the particular smell of the coffee they make, and I was entirely comfortable. Which told me something about what the house on Orchard Street had become to me in a short span of time. The trouble arrived in January, the way January trouble tends to in Michigan. Fast, cold, without warning. I got a call on a Tuesday from a woman named Sandra Voss, who managed the property portfolio for a landlord named Keith Dreher, Dreher Properties, a name most longtime Coopersville residents recognized as belonging to a man who owned 11 residential properties in the county and had a specific approach to maintenance that prioritized appearance over function. I had done work for Dreher Properties before. I had also declined to do work for them before, when what was being asked for was a repair that would look correct on an invoice without actually solving the underlying problem. Sandra Voss told me that one of Dreher's rental houses had a slab leak, a supply line failure under the foundation, and they needed it addressed quickly because the tenant had been complaining for 3 weeks and had now involved the county health department. She wanted to know if I could come out that day, do a temporary repair, and bill the work as a full remediation so the health department inquiry could be closed. I knew what she was asking. A temporary repair documented as a full remediation. The leak would return inside 6 months, probably 4. The health department would close the file. The tenant, whoever they were, would start the whole process again. "I'll come look at it," I said. "But I'm going to do the repair that's actually needed, and I'm going to document what I find and what I did." A pause. "Mr. Dreyer prefers a certain approach to documentation," she said, carefully. "I know," I said. "This is my approach." Another pause. "I'll have to call you back," she said. She called back an hour later and told me Dreyer had decided to use a different contractor. That was fine. I had work enough. What was not fine was what my Uncle Roy told me on Thursday when he called for the week's report, and I mentioned it, that Dreyer had been telling people in certain circles that I was difficult to work with, that I made jobs complicated, that I had a way of turning simple repairs into large invoices. Roy said it gently, the way he says things he knows are going to land badly. I thanked him for telling me. I sat with it for 2 days. A man like Dreyer doesn't have to work hard to damage a reputation in a town the size of Coopersville. He knows the right people. He sits on the right boards. And I had spent 10 years building something, not a name exactly, just a record of showing up and doing the work right. And the thought of watching someone with worse intentions and better connections undo it was the kind of thing that sits in the chest at night and doesn't let you sleep clean. I told Wren on Saturday. I hadn't planned to, but she asked how the week was, and I told her the honest answer, which had become the only kind of answer I knew how to give her. She listened to the whole thing without interrupting. When I was done, she sat with it for a moment. She did that. Gave things their moment before responding, which was one of the things I'd come to rely on, without realizing I was relying on it. "Who's the tenant?" she said. "I don't know," I said. "Sandra Voss didn't say. It's a Dreyer property," she said. "On which street?" "Elm," I said. "The one near the park." She looked at me. "That's the Hendersons," she said. "Owen Henderson. I have his daughter in my class." She said it quietly, something working behind her eyes. "His daughter told me last week that they had to put buckets in the hallway." We looked at each other. "He's been sitting on this for 3 weeks," I said. "And now he's using you not doing a fake repair as cover," she said. Not angry, exactly, precise, to make it look like the contractor is the problem. "That's about it," I said. She got up from the table and went to the counter and came back with a notepad and a pen. "Tell me everything," she said. "Every conversation. Every date. What Sandra Voss said exactly." "Wren, I know someone at the county health department," she said. She said it like a fact she had been keeping in reserve for the right moment. "A parent from last year's class. Her daughter reads at a 4th grade level now, and she told me once that if I ever needed anything." She looked at me. "Write it down." I wrote it down. She took the notepad. Margaret appeared in the kitchen doorway with her tea, took one look at us, and went back to the living room without a word. I thought I heard her humming. Wren made 2 phone calls that day. The first to the health department contact, who listened carefully and said the case was still open and asked Wren to send what she had in writing. The second to a woman from the parent community who was on the county tenant rights board, who said she'd been watching Dreyer properties for 2 years, and this was exactly the kind of documented case she needed. The health department issued a mandatory repair order the following week. Dreyer was required to hire a licensed plumber to conduct a full slab leak remediation, with inspection. The work was inspected. The Henderson family had heat and functioning water by the end of January. Dreher could not comfortably continue the story about me being difficult to work with, while simultaneously being required to do exactly what I had told Sandra Voss needed doing. The story about me did not fully go away. Stories like that rarely do. But the weight of it changed. Roy called the following Thursday and said 2 contractors he knew had called him to say they'd heard what happened and respected how I'd handled it. That was worth something. Not everything, but something. On the Saturday, after the health department order came through, I arrived at the house on Orchard Street at 8:30, and Wren opened the door before I knocked, and she looked at me for a moment, and then she said, "I've been thinking." "About what?" I said. "About the fact that we have coffee every Saturday and talk for 2 hours, and I look forward to it more than anything else I do all week," she said. She said it like she was reporting a finding, not performing a confession. And neither of us has said anything about what that means, which I think is fine. But I'm not sure how much longer I can maintain the fiction that it doesn't mean anything. My hands were cold from the walk from the truck. I put them in my jacket pockets. "I've been thinking about it too," I said. "What have you concluded?" she said. "That I don't want Saturdays to be the only day," I said. "And that I've been trying to find the right moment to say that, and there probably isn't one, so." She looked at me steadily. The uncertain thing I had seen since October, the thing that never fully resolved and never fully disappeared, shifted. It didn't become certainty, exactly. It became something quieter than certainty. Something more like a door that had been closed for a long time, opening not all at once, but enough to let the light through. "My mother is going to be insufferable about this," she said. "I know," I said. "She told me last week that she already wants to meet you." She looked at me with the faint exhaustion of someone who has lived with Margaret Calloway for 32 years and has developed a specific relationship with the concept of inevitability. "She has met you 12 times. She won't acknowledge that those count." "They count differently now," I said. She looked at me for a moment. Then the corner of her mouth moved. Not the full smile, just the beginning of it, which I had come to understand was the more honest version. "Come inside," she said. "The coffee's going to get cold." I went inside. Margaret was at the kitchen table. She looked up when we came in, and something in her expression completed itself, like a sentence that had been building for 3 months finally reaching its period. She looked at us both for a moment, and then she looked back at her book. "There's a third mug," she said, as if this had always been the arrangement. By April, I had been to the school on Maple Street twice. Once to look at a leak in the utility room that the district's maintenance crew had been unable to locate. And once, because Wren had said the reading corner shelf was starting to separate at the bracket on the left side, and she wanted me to see it. The second visit was not really about the shelf. The shelf was fine, but I fixed the bracket, and she showed me her classroom, the reading rug, the word wall, the 23 small desks arranged in a way that she'd spent a September weekend reconfiguring, because the original arrangement made a boy in the back row feel excluded from the group, which she had determined from the way he sat. I looked at the room and I thought about what she had built in it, and what she did inside it every day, and I thought that the things she'd said about finding it meaningful was the least of what was true. The boy who was convinced the number 4 was untrustworthy brought me a drawing that afternoon. He handed it over gravely, like a diplomat delivering a document. Wren looked at it over my shoulder and said, "That's you." He does portraits of people he approves of. I looked at the drawing. It was me, the truck in the background, a wrench in my hand, a very serious expression. I told him it was excellent. He went back to his seat without smiling, which Wren told me afterward was the highest form of praise available from him. Margaret's formal meeting happened on a Sunday in May. She cooked the meal herself and set the table with the good dishes and announced at the start that this was the proper introduction, previous encounters notwithstanding. She asked me questions about my grandmother's percolator and my Uncle Roy and what I thought about the deteriorating state of the county roads, all of which she already knew the answers to. Wren sat next to me and said almost nothing, and once, when Margaret was in the kitchen, looked at me and said, "I'm sorry." And I said, "I'm not." And she looked at me for a moment and then back at her plate, and that was fine. Gerald brought me zucchini from his garden in August, and I told him I was seeing someone, and he looked at me with the expression of a man who has been right about something for a long time. "Is she good?" he said. I told him she built a reading corner in her classroom out of her own pocket because 7-year-olds deserved a good shelf. He nodded slowly. "That's the right kind," he said. That fall, Wren found a house 2 streets over from Orchard, a 1950s ranch that needed work, the kind of work that would take most people years to get around to. She asked if I would come look at it with her. I came. The plumbing was original copper in good condition. Whoever had owned it had done right by the pipes, which told me something about the house and the people who'd lived in it. The kitchen needed a new fixture. The bathroom had a slow drain that was an hour's work. The water pressure at the back was low because the pressure-reducing valve was tired. All of it manageable. All of it the kind of thing you fix properly once and don't revisit. She bought it. I fixed what needed fixing. She painted the front door a dark green that stood out on the block in the specific way of something that is exactly right and knows it. Margaret came by every Sunday and found things she felt needed adjusting and adjusted them, and we let her, because it made her happy, and it was her daughter's house, and some things are worth letting happen. I think about the burst supply line on Orchard Street sometimes, when I'm under a sink somewhere, and the fitting I'm tightening is the kind that has been working on itself quietly for years. The slow pressure, the gradual wearing, the morning it finally lets go. Plumbing is mostly waiting. Waiting for the failure that was always coming, and being there when it arrives with the right part and enough time to do it right. I spent a long time waiting for something I couldn't name. Then a compression fitting cracked on a cold October morning, and a woman in a half-unbuttoned coat walked into a flooded kitchen, asking how bad it was. "Not bad," I had told her. "Contained, it'll dry." I was right about the floor. I had not yet understood what else I was describing. Maybe the thing that's been building longest in a life is not what breaks you. Maybe it's what finally opens. The pressure reaching the fitting, the seal giving way. The water finding the path it was always looking for. Maybe you don't find the life you were meant to have. Maybe a pipe bursts on a Tuesday and someone comes to the door before you can knock and hands you a coffee that's already made. And you understand, slowly, and with full certainty, that you were already home.